Well, last week, Finance Minister Jim Flaherty decided to face the rumors and go public about his health problems. There was obviously something wrong. His swollen face and weight gain over the past year was undeniable. And eventually, Flaherty came out and told Canadians he was on strong medication to treat a very rare skin disorder. But his disclosure was not mandatory, but it did raise a debate in this country, and that is, how much does the public have a right to know about the private lives of politicians? To discuss this now, I am joined by Chris Waddell, the director of the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University, and by Anne McGrath, who was the former chief of staff to late NDP leader Jack Layton, who died of an undisclosed form of cancer. And let me start with you, because that obviously sort of, I think, sets where you stand. The fact that the people around Jack Layton have always decided not to disclose what he died of would indicate that you don't believe that Canadians have a right to that information.
What I believe is that it's a personal decision, and I don't think that Canadians necessarily need to know. I think that they need to know certain things for certain figures. I think there are things like, for instance, there was a big decision about whether or not to disclose that he had prostate cancer, and my position was that it was the right thing to do at the time that it became clear that that's what the problem was. So, you know, medical issues aren't immediately clear. So you don't always know exactly what's going on right at the very beginning. But when it becomes clear and you're in a particular position, not every MP, because there are lots of MPs who have undisclosed health issues even right now, for instance. So I do think it's a personal decision. It's made in consultation with your doctors or your medical team, your family and your closest advisors. And I think that we have struck the right balance in Canada.
Chris, where are you on this?
Not totally different from Anne, but a little bit different, Tom. I think the public has a right to know when the state of a politician's health changes to the point where it may have an impact on their ability to do their job. And that most obviously occurs when there's a visible change, as in Mr. Flaherty's case, or a change in their something else that you would notice, their speaking patterns, those sorts of things. I think when that happens, I think people need to know what's happening, and I think in part because first of all, you need to know whether their ability to do their job is impaired. But I think we also are in an environment that's different than it was a few years ago. And if you don't talk about these things, there tends to be endless rumors. They get circulated around. The world of the internet turns fiction into fact, and a whole bunch of things happen that I think it's in everybody's interest to know and understand what's happening. Politicians are like everyone else. They have illnesses, as with everyone else's, and I think most people would be very sympathetic to the challenges that people may have if they're affected by an illness. But I think, to some degree, by hiding it all, we create a stigma on something that there really shouldn't be a stigma about.
And that's a good point, and I don't want to stay on Jack Layton, because there are certainly many, many other cases. But when you have this non-disclosure as sort of your default position, and only in exceptional cases do you break that, I think as perhaps Chris is suggesting, do you not, though, risk the idea that these rumors are going to go around, and that however much you would like to keep it private, it is going to be public but not factually accurate?
Well, I think that there is endless speculation. I mean, you're absolutely right about that. And in some ways, that's the problem. So, for instance, when we knew that it was possible that Jack had prostate cancer, there was a period of time between the time that we suspected that was the issue and the time that he got the diagnosis. My position was that we come out with it at the point where you have the diagnosis, where you actually know what's going on. But then, following that, we could have done a news conference 5 times a day on the state of his health, and it would still not have satisfied. So there is that speculation. There is a constant kind of drive to be forthcoming about every single detail. And actually, one of the things I remember very clearly was one time when people were pressing Jack on his prostate cancer, and I remember, asking why he wasn't saying more about it. And at some point, he said, "Do you know where the prostate is?" So I mean, there is a level at which I think people have some right to privacy, have to make a judgment call about whether, what the public needs to know and what they need to keep private.
Well, let me advance this argument a little bit, Chris, because, look, there are professions in this country where you have to have mandatory medical checkups every 2 years.
Airline pilots.
Airline pilots for one. CEOs for another. Anybody who has great responsibility has to pass a medical test at regular intervals. in real life.
Right.
Why should politicians be exempt from that?
I'm not sure they should be exempt from it. It's an interesting debating point. I mean, I think there's kind of two issues here. One of which is, and I think we cloud it a little bit if we talk about health records, because we're not necessarily talking about health records, because that,
as they do in the States,
yes, because that could be everyone's health records going back to they were 19. I think if you look at it more in the state of people's health, and is there a change in the state of their health at some point? Do they have to have? I don't know that we need to have annual enforced checkups and then a commissioner of politicians' health to report to and everything like that. And I would also agree very much with Ann that obviously you don't talk about things until you know something's actually happened. What was interesting about Mr. Flaherty, I thought, in that was handled quite well, in that when he disclosed it, he indicated what the illness was, he indicated how it's treated, he indicated what he thought what the prognosis was, and indicated what the side effects would be, which both laid it all out and then allowed journalists to go and check all that independently with a physician who said the same thing that Mr. Flaherty said.
But you know what's interesting, and I mean, in a way, both of you are saying the same thing, that, you know, in exceptional circumstances where a politician's ability to perform his or her job may be compromised by the illness, then there should be disclosure. But who gets to decide that? I mean, what's the trigger for that? Who's the person who says, now, you know, you've got to disclose?
Well, I actually, that's where I think it is a personal decision made in consultation with the medical team, the family, and the closest advisors. And that is the way that you know, and you see that there are lots of situations where it's up for debate about how much people do need to know, what they need to know, well, you know, what the impact, and I totally agree. If it's very visible or it has an impact on the ability to do the job, then I think that there is a requirement. And I think that most politicians in this country recognize that.
Well, a lot of politicians
and I would
could be
agree
in
that
denial
I would agree
about
that
their
Mr.
ability.
Flaherty handled it very, very well.
Right, but there are other examples where politicians have been in denial.
Well, we've had examples when politicians have suffered from dementia, both in the Senate and in the House of Commons in the last 10 years. And we had another situation where Mr. Harper, after he'd been elected, before he became Prime Minister, late January 2006, had an asthma attack, ended up in the hospital. We found out about that a day and a half later. Well, some of those sorts of things, I think, and I think it was discovered by the fact that someone had seen him there and the word got around that what's he doing in the hospital. But those sorts of things, I think, have to be declared. The problem is, on some level, I think you've got to trust people's judgment that when it's going to have an impact on their job. Obviously, their leader plays a role in it if they're a politician. And they also have to worry about the public reaction if they've been not telling the truth about it for a while.
And in Canada, we've handled it well, I believe.
We've only scratched the surface on this, but fascinating start to this debate. Ann McGrath and Chris Waddell, thank you very much for being here this morning. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.